Thanks, Matt, for the introduction. I'm American. Any other Americans here? So just the two of us. Okay. I'm also an academic. I'm going to try to prove Bill wrong that I'm not autistic. Hopefully, I can communicate somewhat functionally. And so I wanted to start today by telling you kind of a quick story that I think will fit into some of the messages that you've heard so far. Specifically, when Shah was talking about kind of how hustling and getting on Twitter to reach out and find collaborations and even find customers or mentors can be useful. Everyone is on Twitter. So I'm going to tell you a story about how I actually met Shah to start. And it was a couple of years ago. I was in Cambridge. I just finished giving a few seminars. And I was at Heathrow about to fly back to Boston when I walked into a bookstore and I saw Shah's book, Stop Talking, Start Doing, in the #1 spot. So I bought it, started reading it, got into it, ended up reading the whole book on the way back to Boston. And as I was reading it, I was like, okay, this is an author that I should definitely be connecting with. Because it was about the time I was writing my book, Black Hole Focus, which was my first book, which means that I had no idea what I was doing. So I was trying to look for other authors to connect with. So I was reading it, and I was like, okay, I really want to connect with Shah. So I did what everyone does nowadays when they want to connect with someone that they don't know, and I stalked her online. And I found her Facebook profile, I found her Twitter page, and I started following on Twitter, and then every about a week, every week or two, when she tweeted something, I'd respond to it, or I'd tweet something that I liked about her book, and just enough to try to connect with her without coming off as like creepy or annoying. But it didn't work. I didn't get her attention in the beginning, and I was just about to give up when I saw her post this picture of 50 Cent reading her book. So 50 Cent is a hip-hop artist in the US, and I was like, what is this American gangster rapper doing reading this British businesswoman's book? I thought it was really cool, so I recommitted. I said, okay, I'm going to try to connect with her. I'm going to take it up a notch. And I did something that I hadn't done up until that point before, and I posted a picture of myself online. I just took a picture. It was a corny picture. It was just me reading her book, and I wrote a message that said, 50 Cent's not the only one reading your book, and hope for the best. Didn't hear anything from her, but one of her fans got involved and said, it would be even cooler if you were standing on your head reading this book. And he was referring to like a picture that I had of myself on my blog standing on my head. At this point, Shah got engaged. She said, okay, this is a great idea. Please do this. I'll send you a signed copy. So I did what I had to do. I spent the next 30 minutes in my office trying to get her book, which is kind of thin, to balance on carpet, which was not easy, and trying to stand on my head and get the picture timer to work right. I got this picture just in time, because then I fell back on my camera with my knee and smashed it and broke it. But I got this off the card, posted it, Shah loved it, and we've been connected ever since. So you can make connections online, and this connection was obviously a very valuable one. It led to me being here, and Shah played a big role in my book launching. So I think if you have kind of that hustle mindset and you're not afraid to look like a fool at times, you can maybe make a connection that might make a difference. Okay, I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about the 5 pillars of developing an entrepreneurial mindset. And this is a concept that Shah introduced at the beginning, this idea of having pillars or kind of key things of what entrepreneurship really is, or kind of what it means to have an entrepreneurial mindset. But it's a word that's not that easy to define. You know, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? What does it mean to think like an entrepreneur? Or how about this? I always like to think of the opposite. What does it mean to not think like an entrepreneur? So the opposite of developing an entrepreneurial mindset would be a sheep mindset. Okay? Now, how many of you have seen sheep here in person ever? Most of you. This is amazing. I'm from America, so like not a lot of people see sheep. And every one of my talks, people are like, I've seen sheep, and I wondered why. I found out there's like over 31 million sheep in the UK, which is a lot of sheep. In America, there's only 5 million of all of America. 31 million here. So anyway, interesting fact. But I say that sheep are interesting because when it comes to scientifically studying herd mentality, sheep kind of reign supreme. In fact, there was a study that was recently done at the University of Leeds that showed for any large flock of sheep, like if you have a flock of 200 sheep, you only have to get 5% of the members of that flock moving in a particular direction for the rest of the flock to follow them without knowing why. All right, and I've seen this firsthand. I grew up working on a sheep farm. I grew up in a remote part of the U.S. called Idaho, and I worked on a sheep farm. And once a summer, we would do something to the sheep. What would we do? Who knows? Shear the sheep. Your sheep knowledge is amazing. Okay, so once a year during the summers, we would shear the sheep. And it was my job, I was just kind of the lowly farmhand, to get the sheep into this big funnel-like fence. So what I would do is I'd go out to the pasture where the sheep were, circle behind the sheep, grab a couple of sticks, and then start banging them together and walking slowly towards the sheep. And the same thing happened every time. A couple of the sheep would hear the noise, because sheep are afraid of everything. They'd take off running in the opposite direction. And as soon as like 2 or 3 of the sheep started running, the rest of the flock would follow without knowing why, and they'd run right into the funnel fence for me. Now, of course, once I shut the gate, they'd huddle up into one corner of the fence, away from the big scary guy with the sheep shearing device. So to get him to go the rest of the way forward, I'd hold out carrots and other little treats in front of him, and they'd move forward, chasing the carrot, until they were stuck in the most narrow part of the gate or the fence, and the shearer would shear them and release them back out into the pasture. Now, these are the only 2 things that sheep responded to, carrots and sticks. But sheep aren't the only animals to respond to these 2 things. Humans respond to them too. In fact, that same study out of the University of Leeds showed that for any large group of human beings, you only have to get 5% of the members in that group moving in a particular direction for the rest of the group to follow without knowing why. All right, so this idea of herd mentality, this is something that not only sheep have, but other animals, humans have. And we see this all the time, especially in business. And most of you are entrepreneurs, and I think they asked a couple of questions at the beginning that showed that most of you have between 1 and 5 people on your teams in your current companies. So you guys really understand the importance of not thinking like a sheep, of having an entrepreneurial mindset. But I think even as an entrepreneur, sometimes it can be easy to look to your left and your right at what the other person is doing and try to chase a trend that somebody else is starting instead of doing something and going on your own path. And so this just shows you how easy, scientifically, how easy it is to follow what everybody else is doing and how you kind of consistently have to bring yourself back and be like, no, I'm going to follow my own path. So let me give you a couple of examples of business, of kind of a sheep mindset, to avoid. Who remembers this campaign or these computers for Apple? Right, so in the late 1990s, Apple launched their very colorful desktop Mac computers. And it was a very successful campaign. They were moving about 1 million of these units a year. It's right after Steve Jobs came back as CEO. And it was part of their ongoing Think Different campaign. Now, right around the same time, I started going to seminars. This was back in university. I started going to seminars in the tech, biotech, and pharmaceutical industries. And I noticed that this campaign started to affect all these other industries. As I was going to these conferences, I noticed that all of the brands started to get more and more colorful. Like this. This is a conference in Japan in the 90s. Very colorful, very noisy brands, very loud. A couple of years later, Apple launched their new white, very sleek computers. Did anybody here have one of these computers? You still do? Okay. It's a good product. Very sleek, very white, very simple. Sure enough, over the next few months and really on up into today in the tech, biotech, and pharmaceutical industries, you see a lot of white. Big white backgrounds, very simple branding. Brands get simpler and simpler, and you see more and more white. The first one was a tech conference. This is a pharmaceutical conference. And so this is just an example, a very easy, visually easy to see example of kind of not just individual businesses chasing a trend, but entire industries chasing a trend, chasing the leading edge, an edge that's being pushed forward by somebody else, just like the sheep chasing the carrots being held out in front of them. Let me give you one more example of a sheep mindset. Who remembers this ancient relic? Blockbuster Video. All right, so unfortunately, they went bankrupt very recently, but in 2004, they were massively successful. They had over 60,000 employees and over 9,000 locations. So what happened? Well, first, companies like Redbox came out with these kind of DVD vending machines where you could rent and buy DVDs in high traffic, high footfall areas, supermarkets and whatever else. Blockbuster was caught on their heels by this, and they were forced to respond to this threat, just like the sheep responding to the sticks, by coming out with their own sad little version of it, their own DVD machines. Of course, they weren't successful. A lot of the high-traffic, high-footfall areas had signed exclusive contracts with Redbox. Blockbuster wasn't able to get any market share back by doing this. Then, Netflix started coming into its own. Netflix started as kind of a DVD mail-order system, and then they started live streaming their movies and TV shows through the internet. The interesting thing is that Blockbuster had a chance to buy Netflix in 2000 for only about 30 million pounds. Now I say only because Netflix is now worth 2 billion pounds. So again, Blockbuster was caught on their heels, had to respond to the threat, just like the sheep responding to the sticks, and come out with their own sad little version of sending out DVDs by mail. They even started live streaming too, which wasn't successful. They called out Netflix and Redbox by name. Wasn't successful, didn't help them get back enough market share, and they went bankrupt. So this is the fate of any individual. It doesn't matter if you're a solopreneur, if you have a small team, a large team. At any point, if you start thinking like a sheep, if you maintain a sheep mindset or you fall into that trap, this is the fate that you're looking at. The only way to avoid this fate is to develop and keep an entrepreneurial mindset. And there are 5 keys or 5 pillars to doing this. The first and most important, which again we've hit on today briefly, is purpose. Purpose is by far the most important. Purpose is, and that's what my book is about, Black Hole Focus. It talks about why you need a purpose, how you and your business can find that purpose, and then how you can fulfill that purpose, especially in the face of adversity. But today I'm going to go beyond purpose, and I'm going to talk about pace, permission, creating a contagious culture, and creating contagious connections with your customers as well. There was a large-scale survey that was reported in Forbes, and I believe it was also reported in The Guardian, I just found out. It was of 40,000 employees from 300 top global organizations. And it was by a company named Tiny Pulse. And what they found was that 58% of employees, 58% have no idea what their company's purpose, vision, or values are. 58%. Serious. 58%. Now, this is a devastating statistic because purpose is strongly linked to motivation and energy. Strongly linked. I can tell you from personal experience that if you lose your sense of purpose, you will feel very demotivated and very de-energized. This is a picture of me in graduate school, my PhD program in the US, which is very similar to your postgraduate programs over here. Does anybody know anyone in a postgraduate program in the UK? No? So it's about 3 years, about a 3-year program here. In the US, it's about 6 years. And for about 50% of PhD students, it's 10 years. It's a very long program, very long. I enjoyed the first couple of years, but right around year 3 or 4, I realized that I didn't want to be a professor anymore. And I kind of lost my sense of purpose. I lost the reason why I was in graduate school. And it was surprising to me, but losing my sense of purpose, it had this phenomenally bad effect on my lifestyle. I became very de-energized, very demotivated, very depressed. And at the same time, I started getting more and more stressed out. I started having full-blown panic attacks. I even developed a kind of kidney condition that's brought about by stress-induced inflammation, all from kind of losing my sense of purpose. And it sounds melodramatic, but it's just an example. Maybe some of you have been there before where you really felt stuck and you didn't really know where you were going or why you were doing what you're doing, like you weren't making any progress. As a result, you felt very demotivated. And that's kind of the state that I was in. Fortunately, a few months later, I found a new purpose. I started getting into business and entrepreneurship, and this gave me a new reason why I was in grad school. Now I was in grad school to get my PhD and leverage it for business and entrepreneurship. And the funny thing was, as soon as I found this new purpose, my energy levels came back to normal. I stopped being confused, I stopped being de-energized, I stopped being demotivated. Energy levels skyrocketed, felt great. And I was always curious as to why when I had a purpose, when I had a strong reason why was I energized? Whereas when I lost my sense of purpose, I had no energy. My energy levels were at rock bottom. And it turns out there's a scientific explanation for this. And I think this is important to pay attention to because a lot of us think of purpose as just kind of this fluffy ideal, like, oh, find your passion, raw, whatever. But it's actually very concrete. There's a science behind finding your purpose and why you should do it for both yourself and your business. In the 1950s, there was a guy named Kurt Richter who graduated from Harvard University, and he did a series of experiments that I like to refer to as the hope experiments. And what he did was he took two groups of rats. First group of rats, he put in a high-sided bucket of circulating water, had them swim as long as they could until they started to sink. Guess how long the average rats could swim for? 5 minutes? 2 days? 15 minutes. Average rat can swim for, just in case you ever wanted to know that, average rat can swim for about 15 minutes. Second group of rats, he put in the same buckets of circulating water, had them swim as long as they could until they started to sink, and right as they started to sink, he saved them, dried them off, let them rest for a little bit, and then put them back in the same buckets of circulating water. Guess how long the rats could swim the second time? Twice as long? 60 hours. 60 hours. 240 times longer than the first group of rats. How is this possible? Dr. Richter didn't inject them with steroids. He didn't let them rest long enough to regrow 240 times as much muscle. So what happened? Dr. Richter's group concluded that the rats were given hope. They had a vision of what being saved looked like, and they kept swimming for it. A better conclusion is that the rats were given energy through hope. That vision of being saved energized them, gave them the energy they needed to keep swimming. All right, let me give you a more practical example of the link between purpose or vision and energy. Have any of you ever played a sport? No one? Done any kind of working out ever? Running? No, a little bit, okay. So I wrestled in high school and college, and during wrestling season, our coaches would take us out onto the track a couple times a week and make us do line sprints. Has anybody had to do sprints ever? Oh, the worst, yeah. So we would just do sprints back and forth, back and forth. They were exhausting, and our coaches would never tell us how many we had to do. We would just keep running. The surprising thing was that no matter how many sprints we just did, whenever our coaches yelled out, last sprint, give everything, all of a sudden we were able to run that last sprint twice as fast as the sprint before. Why was that? It's because what we had in front of us was defined. You know that burst of energy you get as you get close to the finish line for anything, even a project? That's what I'm talking about. When you have once you define the path in front of you, the more you define the path in front of you, the more energy you'll have to achieve it. Now, purpose, that got really loud. So purpose is strongly linked to energy and motivation, not just because it defines the path in front of you, but because it's linked to these central parts of your brain that control things like motivation, decision-making, emotion, and even your sense of self, your sense of identity. So this first large circle here in the middle, this is your limbic system. This is the part of your brain that's responsible for desire and drive and motivation and even decision-making. And then this oval circle, this is your brain stem. This is the most primal part of your brain that's responsible for your sense of self, your identity. These are the same parts of your brain that light up, imaging studies show this, that light up when you think of your purpose or when you feel a sense of purpose. Creating a strong purpose for yourself and your business is the best way to tap into these parts of the brain. It's also the best way to be successful in business. There are many examples of businesses who have been very successful because they had a strong purpose and they built everything around that purpose. Who here has heard of Zappos? A few of you? Maybe 10%? Okay. So for those of you that don't know, Zappos it's an online shoe retailer. And they were very successful. They are very successful. They were recently bought by Amazon for about £1 billion. What made them so successful is that they had a single strong purpose. Does anybody know what that is? Customer service, right. They called it wow customer service. They built their entire company on providing customer service at a level that most people can't even comprehend for their business. And how did they fulfill this purpose? They did things like stay on the phone with their customers for 10 and a half hours just because their customers wanted to talk. Or they paid for the tolls on the road for their customers to get home to their families faster during holidays. And they sent out every order, every shipment, overnight express delivery by surprise for every order that their customer did. So their customer would wake up the next morning and have their product waiting for them on their doorstep. Unbelievable levels of customer service. And because of this, because they built everything around this purpose, they gathered a cult-like following. And again, Were just sold to Amazon for $1 billion. One more example is Apple, who we've already talked about. Apple has built everything that they did around a single purpose, which was to think differently. This Think Different campaign has been around for decades, to challenge the status quo, to be original. And because they've built everything around this purpose, they have a cult-like following, and they've been one of the most successful companies of all time. So how did they fulfill this purpose? They did things like create beautifully designed products that are incredibly simple to use, easy to use. That's the value of purpose. Developing a strong purpose for yourself and your business is the most important thing you can do to maintain an entrepreneurial mindset. It's the most important thing you can do to rally everyone around your idea, your purpose, to rally customers and employees together. Everything else comes second. Pace. So the second pillar of developing an entrepreneurial mindset is pace. Now, more than ever, it's very important to be able to execute things quickly without sacrificing quality or integrity. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in. Most of you guys are in very different industries. So I'm going to show you an industry that you might not think where pace is important, academia. So my first 3 years in graduate school, I spent studying one very small protein called GON4. And it was pretty exciting for us, to use the word exciting loosely. It was pretty exciting because we found that that protein protected people against certain types of lymphoma. And nobody had discovered that protein or characterized it yet, so we were going to be the first people to publish a paper on it. And being the first to publish a paper on something in academia is like being the first to market with your product. It's kind of a big deal. The only problem is that we woke up in December 2009 and found out that somebody else just published a paper on GON4. Bad news, we had to go back to the lab literally and do another 6 to 7 months of work before we could publish our paper. All right, so pace. We know pace is important for things like publishing, for things like being the first to market, but pace is also very important for meeting your customers' needs. How many of you use Evernote? How many of you might say that Evernote can be kind of complicated to use? No one. Everybody thinks it's easy. All right, so when Evernote first came out, it was very complicated. And this is because the CEO made a decision to spend all of the company's time, money, resources, and personnel on product development and nothing else. This means that they developed a very complicated, very powerful product, I should say, that not many people knew how to use. And for those of you that don't know Evernote, it's kind of a cloud-based system that allows you to store data, whether it's PDFs, text, movies, pictures, store data on this cloud-like system. So that's what their customers use it for. And again, they had a very powerful product. It was much more complicated than this when it first came out, and not many people knew how to use it. That is, until one of Evernote's customers, a guy named Brett Kelly, dug into the program. He dug into the program for a couple of months, and he created an online product, an instruction manual for Evernote that he called Evernote Essentials. And he started selling this product online. To date, Evernote Essentials has made £1 million. £1 million on a product teaching people how to use somebody else's product. It's kind of amazing. That's £1 million in revenue and mostly profit that could have been Evernote's. If you don't meet your customers' needs quickly enough, somebody else will, and they'll make a lot of money off of it. So I used to do work with a company called Biorad Laboratories. And it was my job, it was a biotech company, it was my job to help them launch their new cell sorting instrument. It's this all-in-one cell sorter, benchtop cell sorter. Now, a cell sorter is just a medical device that helps researchers and medical personnel study cancer cells. The only problem is that Sony, one of Biorad's biggest competitors, was about to launch a very similar product, and we caught wind of this. And they're about to launch it under a very similar campaign, Sorting Made Simple. Fortunately, at Biorad, we had kind of a panic button that we could hit in the marketing department that would give lower-level personnel a higher level of permission so that they could push out their marketing campaigns faster. We could push out our marketing campaigns faster. So we were able to push out this campaign ahead of Sony. Cell Sorting Made Simple. Very similar. As a result, because Sony is so hierarchical and they have so many checkpoints, they move so slowly, they weren't even able to tweak their campaign after seeing ours. And they had to basically launch the exact same campaign. And they were reduced to literally cutting out the letter R. I don't know if you can see it here. They printed off and cut out the letter R and taped it onto their marketing materials. So that's the power of pace. You should be able to move so quickly that you can either be a part of your competitors' campaigns or you can get out in front of it. And this is something that you really need to pay attention to as you continue to grow and scale. It doesn't matter if you're hiring contractors or you're hiring full-on employees, you got to be able to move quickly. And the best way to move quickly is to give people high levels of permission, which is the third pillar of developing an entrepreneurial mindset. Now, I mentioned briefly how with Bio-Rad that they were able to get their campaign out first, and because of it, they had a much more successful year than Sony. They moved twice as many units as Sony, all because they had a faster pace. And really, a fast pace is the only thing that can make a company the size of Sony resort to cutting out the letter R and taping it onto their marketing materials. And the only way to have a fast pace is to give people a higher level of permission. That's what Bio-Rad did. They gave their lower level employees in the marketing department a higher level of permission so that they could push out their campaigns faster. So before I talk more about what permission looks like, let's talk about what it doesn't look like. So recently I moved, and despite the fact that most of my business is done online, I forgot to set up an internet connection at my apartment. Has anybody ever moved and forgot to set up an internet connection or been for like a day without an internet connection? It feels like your arm is missing. It's the worst. So I ran down to the nearest internet provider I could find, and I was like, okay, if I beg him and offer him enough money, I can get him to come over that day to set up an internet connection. Wrong. I went down there, and I remember the guy behind the counter very vividly. He just kept saying, not possible, not possible. I said, well, do you have any service personnel in the building today? He's like, yeah, I have 3 sitting in the back drinking coffee, doing nothing. I was like, okay. Do you have all the equipment you would need to set up the internet connection, including modems, whatever else? He's like, yeah, I have all the equipment that we would need. I said, well, do you have any service vans? He's like, yeah, I have 3 out front. I was like, well, if I pay you 500 euros extra, could you set up the internet connection? Not possible, not possible. He just kept saying, not possible, not possible. So I didn't give up. I kept trying, and for about 10 minutes, I looked something like this. And towards the end of that 10 minutes, he started to look something like this. And I started to feel like this. The simple truth is that no matter how much money I offered him or how many resources he had that he wasn't using, he wasn't allowed to help me. He didn't have permission to solve his customers' problems. Now you might be thinking, well, I work all by myself. I don't have any employees. I have all the permission I need. Well, at some point, you're going to have to work with, let's say, contractors, or maybe you hire people online, independent contractors, Elance, whatever it might be. This is something to keep in mind when you do that as well. The more permission you can give these people, the better. The faster you'll be able to move. The faster you'll be able to enter new markets and get your product out. A few years ago, I did some work with a small software company that had a pretty big problem. Again, it was a very small company, about 5 people, but they were overspending massively when it came to traveling, going to conferences, going to trade shows. And to solve this problem, they just kept piling on more and more restrictions. It got to the point where everybody in that company would have to give approval for even a business dinner for the 2 sales reps. It's ridiculous. So as a result, nobody would look at it, they would just pass it through. And once the sales reps got approval, they would kind of overspend out of spite. So to solve this problem, instead of adding more restrictions, we just removed them all. And we said, from now on, the decision is yours. For any event, for travel, for going to a conference, business dinner, as long as the price of it costs less than one of our software dongles, which we were selling at the time for like 2,000 pounds, then the decision is yours to make. Now, you might think this is a disastrous decision, like spending would go through the roof and it would make the company go bankrupt. But in fact, the opposite happened. Spending decreased sharply. And when we asked everybody in the company why, they said it's because they felt a greater sense of loyalty to the company because of the greater permission they were given. And they also felt a greater sense of responsibility because now the decision was theirs to make. And so they felt bound to it. And that's the power of permission. There's really 4 ways to provide your employees or contractors with permission. The first is in terms of when they do it, so time, how they do it, technique, who they do it with, team, and what they do, task. So time, technique, team, and task. And a company that does a great job of providing their employees with all 4 of these levels of permission is Google. Google has their famous 20% rule. Who's heard of this? Their 20% rule. So basically, only 1 or 2. So what Google does is they let their employees have 20% of their time to themselves to do whatever they want. A full workday a week to do whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want, with whoever they want. So all 4 levels of permission. Now again, you might think that giving your employees or contractors this level of permission would drive your business into the ground. But in fact, the opposite happened. Some of Google's most successful products have come out of the 20% rule, including Google Calendar and Gmail. Who uses Gmail here? Like everyone. It's Google's second most successful product ever next to Google Search. And it's the result of that 20% rule. It's the result of giving employees, contractors, a higher level of permission. Permission is one great way to change an organization for the better. Another great way to change the organization from the inside is, by creating a contagious culture. Shouldn't have showed that. By creating a contagious culture. Recently, I worked with a company in Oregon. Oregon is a remote part of the US. The interesting thing about Oregon is that they were one of the first states in the US to legalize marijuana, which I'm told that's what this is. A friend told me, I'm not sure. Now, as you can imagine, legalizing marijuana in the state, it not only affected the culture of this business, but affected the culture of the entire state. And if I had to use a picture to describe that culture, I would use a picture like this. It's a very mellow culture, a very chill culture. All right, so the only problem was that the owner, he wanted to sell his business now. So he needed everybody to become more aggressive, and he needed sales to increase because he wanted to clean up his books and get his revenues and profits as high as possible so that he could make a good exit, so he could sell it for as much as possible. And his first kind of idea for changing the culture of the organization was to write up a bunch of new standard operating procedures to really kind of just drill rules and regulations down people's throats to make them more aggressive. This didn't work, rarely does. So what we decided to do instead was we decided to create a meme. A meme. A meme is just a unit of cultural transmission. It's a behavior that can be transmitted from person to person or employee to employee through any kind of medium, whether it's a video, a picture, a word, or a phrase. And we've already talked about one of these memes, wow customer service. Zappos created this meme of wow customer service, and it transmitted itself throughout the entire organization, rallied everyone around one purpose, and made that company very successful. The meme that we came up for with this company to get people to be more aggressive or to try harder was bringing it hard. We just kept telling people, thank you for bringing it hard. So we didn't write up anything at first. We just would say this phrase, this kind of meme, and bringing it hard just means, it's probably more of an American thing, but it just means trying hard or going above and beyond, giving extra effort. So we started saying, thank you for bringing it hard. It kind of caught on a little bit. People liked the wording. It started to percolate throughout the organization. And then we started tapping into people's identities more by giving them different, bring names. We would say, thank you, bring Kong, or thank you, Marilyn, bring Roe, or thank you, Pablo, bring a bar, or thank you, Bringo Star, or thank you, Abraham Brinken. Creative ideas, sounds really corny, but people liked it. They were signing off emails with these different bring names. And it even got to the point where somebody in the organization created these different thank you cards. They called them bring cards, and would hand them out to people when they hit their sales quotas, or when they stayed extra or stayed on a call longer in customer service. And again, it sounds very simple, but it started to change the entire organization. Hiring managers started hiring people that brought it harder, that were more aggressive. Customer service people started staying on the phone longer. They started staying after to take another call, seriously, at work. The salespeople, the sales reps, they started entering new markets. Their sales increased overall. In fact, for 2 years straight, their sales increased by 10% every quarter. And the company was recently sold, and the owner made a great exit. All from just starting a meme, this kind of like viral idea that was linked to the company's new purpose that redirected the company. And this works for companies large and small. This is especially useful strategy for small companies, but it also works for larger companies. So Alcoa is one of the largest. Now I want to say aluminum here, but I know you guys say aluminum. Metal, the largest metal manufacturer in the world. Okay, but they had a big problem in the 70s and the 80s. And the problem was that they were having too many reportable accidents every year. You can imagine that working at a metal manufacturing plant is pretty dangerous. But they also weren't growing. Stagnant growth, very low performance throughout the 70s and 80s. So they hired a guy named Paul O'Neill to be the CEO. And Paul O'Neill, when he came in, he didn't give a big, long lecture about revenues, profits, whatever else. He just came in and he said basically one thing, one message. He said safety. That's what we're going to be known for. We're going to be the safest organization on the planet. Safety. And this idea of safety, it became kind of a meme. It became a new purpose, and it started percolating throughout the rest of the organization. And because of it, they restructured the organization so that if there was an accident at one site, that everyone else at all the other sites had to find out right away. So lines of communication opened. Also, lower-level employees were given a higher level of permission so that they could contact the CEO right away within 24 hours if there was an accident. So again, the meme changed the organization. As a result, for 30 years, their reportable accidents have declined, and 20 of those years are after Paul O'Neill left. And during much of that same time, their performance has increased, and they became one of the top performers on the Dow Jones, all from starting a meme, all from using an idea, not beating orders or standard operating procedures down their employees' throats, but by starting this meme. The meme is the new mission statement. So what if you had to create a meme right now for your business, what would it be? Would it be catchy? Would it be sticky? The fifth pillar of developing an entrepreneurial mindset is creating contagious connections with your customers. Now, of course, before you can create a contagious connection, you have to create a connection. And before you can create a connection, you have to know who you're connecting with. And the only way to know who you're connecting with is to ask questions. But it all starts with who. It all starts with knowing your customer. Is he your customer? Or is she? What about her? Now just notice the very different emotions and ideas you get in your head when you look at each of these pictures. Very different customers. Very different people. Knowing who they are is very important. And it's something that I think gets lost when you're kind of in the grind, in the madness of starting your own business. But it is the most important thing you can do in terms of creating connections with your customers. And the only way to figure out who your customers are is to ask questions. That's the first step. There's kind of 3 keys to creating contagious connections. And the first key is asking good questions. Not questions that are stuffed with industry jargon, not questions that kind of, those questions where the answer is kind of predisposed, where it shoves an answer down the person's throat. Not those kind of questions. Just questions that you would ask your friends and that are open-ended so that your customers can answer in a way that will allow them to identify their real pain points and what their real needs are. And then finally, once you know who your customers are, you need to tap into that. You need to get them to identify with you. You got to tap into their identity and get them to identify back with you. And then once you get them to identify with you, you have to arouse them to action. You have to get them to buy your product or service, or you have to get them to share their product or service or content or message with other people. But it all starts with questions. So let me just give you an example of a question that I recently asked my customers. What are your top 2 hobbies? Now you might think, what a joke. What a waste of time is this question for asking customers. What sort of valuable business information could I get out of this? Well, let's take a look. So Nisha Sood is one of my long-term customers. I hadn't heard from her for 6 months. She bought a couple of products from me, disappeared, came back because she liked this question, wrote drawing and painting, so what I did was I got on Amazon, sent her a nice little painting kit as just a gift. I don't know if any of you have read The Thank You Economy, but sent her this nice little painting gift. She loved it. She's come back every day since, and she's brought a lot of other people to me. She's been a raving fan, one of my biggest supporters. So that's the value of the information that you can get by asking simple questions and digging into the answers and figuring out who your customers are. But again, you might think, okay, this is because it's your page. You're an individual. And I know a lot of you are individuals here, but this is something that goes beyond the individual that larger companies or small companies can use to their advantage as well. One example, one page that I really like is Vitamin Water. Vitamin Water asks really good questions, and they ask like friend-like questions. Look at this question. There's so much slang I can barely understand it. All right, for all of those who know the hustle doesn't sleep, we salute you. So what's everyone working on at this late hour? This is not a corporate question stuffed with industry jargon. It's just a question that you would ask a friend. And again, you might think, okay, great, what valuable information could I get out of this that's going to make me a millionaire? Let's take a look. Can you get any valuable information? Let's look at just one person, Mandy Karina. She writes, salute to my hubby who works graveyard and can't always eat, so he drinks vitamin water. Love you, baby. So what information do we get out of that response? Can anybody give me an example? Who is buying the vitamin water here? Wife for their husband. Okay, that's useful information. So we could check that, see if that holds up. What else? What kind of occupational demographic might we want to look at? Night workers, right? And Vitamin Water does this already. They sell their stuff at a lot of 24-hour convenience stores. Also, it's interesting that she mentions meal replacement. Maybe Vitamin Water could position themselves as kind of a meal replacement, or they could come out with a new product that is a meal replacement. All from asking good questions. Now, once you know who your customers are and what their needs are, you have to tap into that. You have to tap into their identity. And identity is very powerful. So that's the second thing, the second key to creating contagious connections. And identity is so powerful because this part of your brainstem, the most primal part of your brain, it controls your sense of self, it controls your identity, but it also controls your entire awareness and things like motivational movement too. So tapping into this part of your brain is critical to arousing action. Let's say you were trying to sell this house. You had a customer with you. You wanted to make this house seem as attractive as possible. What are some of the things you might say? What are some of the things you might say? Yeah, brightness of the windows. What else? It's massive. I love that word. Anyway. Well, that's asking a good question. That's good. You're ahead of me. But right, so most people would just name the features of the house, right? The best features of the house. We'd say things like, yeah, bright windows, massive house, grass staircase, there's a hot tub here. How'd you guys miss that? Garage, big. A much better way to sell this house would be to simply say the following. This is the kind of house that millionaires live in. Right there, you tap into the identity of the buyer because either they're a millionaire and they like being a millionaire, or they want to see themselves as a millionaire. And there's a great series on integrity selling that you should check out, but tapping into identity, no matter what you're selling, is very, very powerful. I'll give you a more practical example that might be more applicable to this group, because we're all starting up, we're building our websites up. I recently started a website where I had a blog on it, and I would use the blog to drive traffic to the site and to convert to sales. Released a new article every week or so, and one week I decided to write an article called 120 Things Wrestling Taught Me About Business Success. And I remember this week because the rest of my team was telling me that I was an idiot. I was like, this article is not going to get shared. Nobody cares about wrestling. The niche is too small. It's not really related to what we're selling. Why are you doing this? To be honest, I agreed with them, but it was like a passion project for me because I wrestled, so I published it anyway. And I'm glad I did, because the first week it went out, it got over 5,000 likes and shares on Facebook. More importantly, it got over 14,000 unique views in just a week, over 17,000 views total. And just as a comparison, this was a fairly new site. Just as a comparison, a year before that, the same week, only over 400 unique views. Just from tapping into identity. It went crazy throughout the wrestling network around the world, was shared with everyone, and they all stayed. And I've continued to tap into identity with different niches like that. So again, this is the power of identity. When you tap into somebody's identity, when they identify with you, they will stick with you for life. Now, once you tap into people's identity, you have to still arouse them to action. You have to arouse them to share your article, or to share your product or service, or hopefully to buy your product and service. And that's the third key to creating a contagious connection, arousal. The best way to arouse someone to action is to tap into this central part of the brain we've talked about before, the limbic system, because this is where your emotions and decision-making are controlled. So you want to get somebody emotional, and then you want to make them make a decision to act. And you might think that the best emotions to tap into would be things like fear or anger, or maybe even happiness or contentment. But when it comes to arousing action, when it comes to getting people to share things, when it comes to making things contagious, one emotion stands above the rest. And it's a sense of awe, or a sense of wonder. There was a study recently that tracked all New York Times articles that were written over a 6-month period. And it tracked these articles in terms of how often they were shared and in terms of what emotions they triggered in the readers. And what they found is that the articles that inspired a sense of awe over everything else, over articles that made people angry, mad, sad, happy, whatever, were shared far and above all the others, a sense of awe. So what do I mean by a sense of awe? I'm going to show you a video here that Microsoft recently released that really nailed it. It's been voted by several organizations as the best commercial so far for 2014, and it really nails what I mean by that sense of wonder. And those articles that were written, that were shared, the kind of two different things they tapped into to create a sense of wonder were, one, technology, scientific advancements, and two, personal stories of people overcoming great odds. So this is critical. If marketing is important to any of your businesses, which it's got to be important to all of them in the day that we're in now, knowing this and knowing that this is what makes people share, what makes people buy, is very important. So I'm going to show this commercial, and notice that they tap into both these kind of areas of wonder or awe, technology and personal stories. So, yeah.
What is technology? What can it do?
When I lost my eyesight, I thought that my painting days were over.
How far can we go?
By using your hands, you can actually control your X-ray.
Technology has the power to unite us.
Hang on, honey. Hang on.
There he is. You see him?
I can see him.
It inspires us. Technology has taken us places we've only dreamed.
Now I can do whatever I want.
It gives hope to the hopeless.
So your device is on. Can you hear me talking?
And it has given voice to the voiceless.
Has anybody seen that commercial before? A couple of people? So that's what I mean by a sense of awe. And again, notice how they use technology, science, personal stories to kind of create that sense of wonder. And because of it, it's been shared millions and millions of times, extremely popular, very big win for Microsoft, especially over Apple. So again, the 5 pillars of developing an entrepreneurial mindset: purpose, pace, permission, creating a contagious culture internally, and then externally, creating contagious connections with your customers. 5 pillars. 5 pillars that you can take home and you can start enacting right now. Which one or two could you take home to your business and make a difference, whether it's just you, 3, 4, 5 people? Which pillar? If you don't develop an entrepreneurial mindset, you'll never be anything more than a sheep. You'll be that 95% of the herd that's just following what the first 5% are doing. You'll be chasing carrots and running away from sticks. Doesn't matter if you're, again, a solopreneur by yourself, 2 or 3 other people. The only way to get on the leading edge and stay there is to develop and maintain an entrepreneurial mindset. And if you do this, you'll be part of that. You won't be part of that 95% of the herd. You'll be part of that 5% that is leading the herd. You'll be leading yourself, leading your business, and you'll be successful this year and beyond. Thank you.